you. If you haven't been out to church in a little while, we are missing you, and we'd love to be able to see you out, but we're glad that you're able to join us online and kind of stay plugged in with what's going on here at Greater Philly. We have some great things coming up we'll talk about at the end of the service for some upcoming opportunities and different things here at the church. And so if you kind of feel, especially this week, things are kind of shaken up and shaken off a little bit, as we had the CDC gave the announcement if you're vaccinated to go ahead and no more mask wearing. So that was kind of good news, but confusing because where do you wear a mask? When do you not wear a mask? And so as well with the gas prices and all that stuff going on down south. We were just talking about it this morning. If you had a chance to see any of those pictures of people filling up Rubbermaid containers with gasoline and people putting gas in grocery bags. And my thought is you better double bag it if you're going to put it in a grocery bag, right? And so all kinds of craziness. It seems like now that things are starting to ease up just a little bit, that people are almost getting unreasonable a little. You feel like that? Anybody feel like people are getting a little bit unreasonable? What's interesting, and this is crazy, what people used to say online, if you've noticed this, say, yeah, I see this. People used to just kind of like, hey, I can go ahead and say whatever I want to online because there's a little bit of social anonymity to some degree. But I feel like, do you feel like people kind of, that unrest and the kind of the toxicness that's on social media is now not just social media, it's like life, right? Like people are kind of saying and doing whatever they want to, even in the public place. And so if you're interested, go ahead, you can just take a minute to download the notes and to go ahead and pull those up. What we're talking about this morning is how to make tough decisions easier. If you've ever had to make a decision, you know how difficult it can be at times. And so the challenge for us is how do we make decisions that are difficult? How do we make decisions that are tough? How can we make them so much easier for us? And so if you have notes there, you can look and see that God has a dream for your life, a plan that is good, that is acceptable, and that is perfect. And so with God's plan for your life, if you say that phrasing sounds kind of familiar, it should be. If you have been around church for any length of time, in Romans 12, 1 and 2 talks about renew your mind so that you can prove what's good, acceptable, and God's perfect will. Well, my question for us this morning is this. Do you agree, yes or no, that we can either help or hinder God's plan in our lives? That there are decisions that we can make that help us to move forward in what God's plan is for us, or we can make some bad decisions like trying to put 5 gallons of gasoline in a shopping bag that can kind of mess up our life for us. And the answer is, yeah, we can. I think we've all been there. Maybe, I don't know all your history, and you don't know all my history, but we know enough about each other's being human beings that we've all made decisions at times that we can regret. And so as you look there in your notes, we've come through these different messages, and we have questions that we've talked about. And so the first question was the integrity question. And we talked about the honesty, am I being honest with myself, really, really, truly honest? We talked about the conscious question, about am I going to go ahead and dig a little deeper, and instead of ignoring my conscience, I'm going to explore my conscience. And if I have doubts, how to go ahead and dig a little deeper to figure out those different issues. We talked about last week about the legacy question. What story do I want to tell with my life, or do I want specifically my kids to tell about my life by the decisions I make? And this week we're going to look at this question, the maturity question. The maturity question is this. You can write it down in your notes there. What is the wise thing to do? What's the wise thing to do? Now in our society today, and even in everyday life, we find ourselves that there are things we put into 2 different categories. There are things that are right and what? Say it out loud. There's right and wrong. Go ahead and you can put it there in the comments section there. We're kind of a little bit slow here this morning, but we're gonna speed it up a little bit. All right, so there's right and wrong. There can be, and this is gonna be a little bit tougher, there can be things that are legal or what? Illegal. Okay, we got it. There are things that can be moral or what? Immoral. Now the question is this. This is a tough one. You got to really think about this. Can something be right, can be legal, can be moral, can be permissible, but unwise at the same time? Yes or no? I don't know. That's okay. We're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about that. The answer is yes, and I'm going to show you why. that even though something can be permissible, something can be legal, but depending on the story, depending on your life, depending on my life, Paul says that there can be an opportunity to do something. And the question shouldn't be, okay, how far can I push the limit? Or how low can I go? We talk about limbo. You ever play? I hated limbo. Limbo for me was like, I might as well just sit on the floor because I couldn't bend back that way, right? And so the question is this, not how low can I go or how close to the line can I push something, but the question is this, even if something is permissible, even if I could, the bigger question is, should I? Should I do something? Ephesians 5:15-17, Paul really pulls us into this concept here we're going to talk about. And listen what he says here. Ephesians 5:15-17, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. We're going to go ahead and just take a moment as we're jumping into this because I want to help you to understand how we can take difficult, tough decisions and make them easy, how to simplify and take the complexity and the guesswork. What if the next time you had a tough decision to make, what if you had a framework to follow? What if you had a step-by-step checklist to follow to go ahead and make that decision? Would you want to know? Well, yeah, sure, I would want to know. We find this. Paul says, be very careful. Can you remember, think back. Now, we've got some young folks here today, and I'm going to throw this out to them as well. Do your parents tell you, if you think back to when you were a teenager, did your parents tell you, hey, make sure you drive right at the speed limit. Make sure you go ahead and even drive faster than the speed limit if you have to. No, they said, be careful when you drive, right? Or did they say, hey, make sure you stay out as long as you can and make sure you just get in right at curfew. No, they say, make sure you're home by what? By curfew. Do they say, hey, make sure that you just push the envelope, make sure you push it to as far as you can without getting in trouble? No, our parents tell us all the time, be careful. Why? Because we find here, Paul says this, be careful to take close watch of how you live your life. And he gives us these two different options for us. Not right or wrong, not moral or immoral, not legal or illegal. He says, as unwise or wise. Because what Paul shows us here is he ups the ante for us just a little bit and takes it to a whole different level and says, we're not talking about what's right or wrong. We're not talking about what's permissible or impermissible. We're talking about, is this wise or is this unwise for me to do? Why? What's at stake here? This next phrase in verse 16, making the most of every opportunity. That's the key. If you're taking notes this morning, you can go ahead and circle that phrase, making the most of every opportunity. Because the difference between you wasting an opportunity and making the most of an opportunity is how you approach it as either unwise or wise. The book of Proverbs talks over and over and over again about how to have wisdom and how to go ahead and walk through life and not get tripped up with regrets. And this whole series has been all about how to have better decisions so that we can mitigate or have fewer regrets. And so we find here, he says, you have opportunities before you. What we see is this. In other translations, in the King James, it says redeeming the time. In some translations, it says reclaim. And I want you to go ahead and write that in the margin of your notes. Redeem the time. Redeem the time. That's a strange concept for us. Because this concept of redeeming the time is stuff we don't usually talk about. Hey, make sure you redeem the time. You've never had anybody tell you that, right? You've had people say, don't waste your time. You ever hear that? Anybody? Don't waste your time. We talk about spending. How are you going to spend your afternoon? How are you going to spend your time? How are you going to invest your time? I want you to think about and dial in here with me for just a minute. Because up to this point, I've preached on this passage, I've talked about this passage, and I kind of just gloss over the whole redeem the time, just buy back the time. Well, how do you do that? Think back, we're in 2021 now. We're in 2021. Now think back over the last 10 years, from 2010 to 2020, the last decade. It's crazy thinking in those terms. But over the last decade, and think about maybe some regrets that you've had. Think about maybe some decisions you've made. And we find this, you've probably heard the saying, those who don't learn from history are doomed to do what? Are doomed to repeat it, right. So if we don't learn from our past, those regrettable decisions we've made, we are doomed to repeat them. So how many of you would like to have a repeat, a clone of 2020? None of us, right? Nobody would say, hey, I want to relive 2020. No, not too many of us would say we want to relive the last 10 years. We want to have a fresh new start, a fresh future for ourselves. And so here's the kicker for us then. How do you redeem the time? We redeem the time by learning from the past 10 years so we don't repeat the past 10 years, because that would be what? That would be a waste, right? Because we've been there. It's like riding a merry-go-round. You ride it long enough, you're going to end up throwing up. And you go around again and again and again, and what do? You throw up even more, right? Bad idea. And so making the most of every opportunity, how do we do that? By making wise decisions and learning from the past. And so how do you redeem the time? You make the most of every opportunity by learning from our past so that we don't repeat it. So we make changes. Why? He gives us what's at stake, because the days are evil. I don't think we have to look very far and go too far to understand. If you just go into this life, into culture and society, without any values or bearings, is culture and society going to give us a level up or a leg up on our values? Is society going to teach us how to do things right? No, the answer is no. Because look at how people are going crazy right now. We talked about it a little bit at the beginning. People are getting angry and frustrated and mad at each other. And it's so explosive. Why? We think back in the last 16 to 18 months, we've been quarantined. We've been kind of stuck inside. We've been contained. And so all it takes for something to be explosive, it needs a container, it needs fuel, and it needs a spark. And so the container has been what? Quarantined, right? What's the fuel? Well, unmet expectations. I mean, people have so many unmet expectations. Wanting to graduate, wanting to move on with our plans, wanting to get the promotion, wanting to move on with life, wanting to do things and have goals. Unmet expectations, that's the fuel. And so what happens then? What's the spark? Any single little thing that takes place where people get upset. It doesn't take much for somebody to get totally upset and do something crazy. The days are evil. He says then, don't be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. How do we understand God's purpose and plan for our lives? How do we do that? Well, it's a simple step. It's learning to look at these 6 steps we're going to look at to understand how to make decisions based on God's will, God's plan and purpose for our life. So as you look at your notes there, we're going to dive in here. We're going to see this. How to make decisions that are tough. How to make them easier. 6 steps to make tough decisions easier. Number 1 is this. Step 1 is this. Pray for guidance. Pray for guidance. It starts first and foremost with praying for guidance. Pray for guidance. In Proverbs chapter 28, verse 26 says this, that a man is a fool to trust himself, but those who use God's wisdom are safe. So again, we can either put our focus in ourselves, trust our own kind of gut instinct, or we can go with, well, what does God say? What's God's wisdom? We find then, and look, Colossians 3:15 echoes this sentiment, where we see that the peace of Christ gives, that the peace that Christ gives is to guide you in the decisions you make. That's what a great verse for us, that decision making and having peace in our lives can be coupled together. You ever try to make a decision and just kind of, I don't know, kind of antsy about it a little bit, kind of at unrest, not very peaceful? We find that when we have God's guidance and we pray for guidance in our lives, that one of the results, one of the signs that we have God's guidance is there's a peace for us. So with each one of these steps, we're going to ask ourselves a question. The question is this. When we pray for guidance, we want to ask ourselves this question. What does God want? What does God want from me? What does He want me to do? And when we pray and ask for guidance. Step number 2 is this. Not only pray for guidance, but get the facts. Before you make a tough decision, one way to simplify it or take the guesswork out of it is to get the facts. Proverbs 13:16. We'll look at that verse here. In Proverbs, Solomon writes this again. He says, every prudent man, that is a wise man, acts out of what? Knowledge. What is knowledge? You can write this down in the margin. Information. How many of us, well, you don't have to raise your hand, I'll just put it this way. You ever get a phone call from a number that you don't recognize, and they leave a voicemail? And maybe this isn't for everybody, but I'll be honest here. There's times where I don't want to listen to the voicemail. I don't want to hear what that unnamed number has to say or tell me. Usually it's, your kids are ready for a dentist appointment, or, hey, we're open again for whatever the thing, or usually it's, whoever makes decision that your local business, we'd like to go ahead and set up a time to come and clean your business for you. And it's like, well, I'm the one, my family, we do the cleaning at our business at the church. And so sometimes we get a little hesitant, or we get a bill in the mail. And how many times we, for some of us, put a bill aside, we didn't open up because we were afraid to know the truth. The decision that you're struggling to make right now, what if you could suck all the emotion out of it, take all the emotion and just get the facts, and realize, and you can jot this down, I'm going to try to say this as best I can. Here's something we need to realize, even as bad as things are, and I was talking to a man about this the other day, that things are a lot better than I think they are. Things are a lot better than you think they are. And the second thought is this. So things are a lot better than I think they are. So don't believe everything I think. And the second thought is this. Things aren't as bad as I feel they are. Because here's the reality. One of the new habits that we picked up, for good or bad, it's good, is we'll get up in the morning and we'll go watch the sunrise. We'll drive to our favorite coffee shop and we'll go sit out there and we'll sit in the parking lot and watch the sunrise. And as we were sitting there talking one morning, I said to Amanda, I looked at the news that morning for just a little bit, and I said, if I didn't watch the news and just looking around us, I wouldn't know that anything was bad going on in society. If I didn't see what was going on in the news feed, I wouldn't realize that anything bad is happening. And so we want to go ahead and, what are the facts right now? We find this, the next verse there in your notes is this, in Proverbs 18, verse 13. He makes it pretty plain. It's stupid. You ever want to be called stupid? None of us want to be called stupid. It's stupid to decide before knowing the facts. But how many times do we make decisions before we get all the facts? In Proverbs, it also says, Solomon talks about this, that it's foolish to answer a matter before we hear the whole thing. You ever find yourself trying to tell somebody a story or explain something to them, and they say, oh, I know. No, you don't know. Let me finish what I'm about to say. And so we want to get all the facts. And the question we want to ask ourselves here, if you look on the inside of your notes then, is this. What do I need to know? What are the facts? What do I need to know? People all around us, there are all kinds of things that people want us to know that are just non-essential to our lives. But the question we want to ask is this. What do I need to know? Number 3 is this, and the third step is ask for advice. So we ask God for guidance, we get the facts, and then we ask for advice. Proverbs 24, verse 6. Solomon again gives us this piece of advice. He says, the more advice you get, the more likely you are to win. The more advice, the more input from other people, you can learn from other people's mistakes and failures and mess-ups and misfortunes. And you can learn from their regrets. And so this third step is ask for advice. Someone once asked Henry Ford, what's the key to success? And he said this, make wise decisions. So they followed up with the next question was, well, how do you make wise decisions? And his response was to make stupid decisions. The reality is you can save yourself, I can save myself from making those decisions. How? By getting advice from other people and by asking them for help. And we can save so much time, so much heartache. But one of the pervasive mindsets in our society, and we all struggle with this in our human nature, is this. Well, I have to learn for myself. I have to experience it myself. I can't necessarily trust somebody else, but I have to experience it myself. And yet there's this conflict for us because when it comes to some things, we don't take people's advice. We don't take their input. But when it comes to maybe buying a product, and how many times do we buy something based on the reviews online when we're buying something? We want to see if, however many reviews are given, we want to see that there's a high percentage of 5-star ratings and good reviews for us. And so the question that we want to ask then is this. Ask, who knows what I need to know? Who knows what I need to know? Who knows what I need to know? You can jot down in your notes, you can ask friends, you can ask different people. If you say, but the people that I need to ask, I can't get to them because they're really famous or they're like really busy. You can go find a book on Amazon. You can listen to a podcast. You can watch a documentary. You can go look on YouTube. There's so many places we can get advice from. If we just go ahead and Google it, just search it out, we can find so many different places where people have said, hey, I tried this or did that, whatever it might be. So who knows what I need to know? Step number 4 is this. Calculate the cost. Calculate the cost. We have to go ahead and measure out and think through, do I want to make this decision based on the cost involved? Proverbs 20, verse 25. Again, we're going to hear from Solomon. He says it's a trap for a man or a woman to dedicate something, to make a decision, to commit to something quickly, rashly, and only later to consider his vows. He says, be so careful before you jump into something and commit to something, because here's the deal. You can jump into something far easier than you can get out of it, right? How many times have we made a contract or signed up for something or subscribed to something and we can't unsubscribe it? I subscribed my email, got on an email list for an organization one time, and I wanted to get off of it and unsubscribe from it. You know what I found? There was no unsubscribe button at all. And they were pretty tricky about it. It was really hard to unsubscribe. Because why? It's so much easier to get into things than to get out of things. It's a principle of life that Solomon gives to us. Jesus echoes this in the New Testament in Luke chapter 14, verses 28 to 29, where he says that somebody doesn't just go to battle without counting the cost of what the war is going to cost. They don't build a tower without first counting the cost of what it's going to cost them to build. I just read this article this week. Mohammed Hadid, the dad of Bella and Gigi Hadid, the models. This guy's pretty wealthy, but he also ran into some trouble, legal trouble, this past week, and it was kind of culminating in some things that happened. He decided to go ahead and out in California, in LA area, he decided to build a house. And so he got the blueprints, got the architectural plans, and submitted them to the city board, and the plan was to build a 3,000 square foot house. Well, in the midst of doing this project, he decided, you know what, 3,000 square feet isn't enough for my house. So he doubled it. And he went back to the drawing boards, redrew the plans, and had plans for a 6,000 square foot house. But he didn't submit those plans to the city. And so he started building this house, and as he started building this massive mansion that was going to be estimated at some $50 million, he ran out of money. And so as he ran out of money, the local authorities found out, and they took it to court, and the judge says, you have to knock it down. You have to pay some fines, cease and desist, otherwise we're going to put you in jail. And he said, well, I don't like to hear that. I don't want to hear that because I don't have the money to even knock down what I've built so far. And so throughout some legal battles and some legal struggles that he went through, he finally sold his estimated $50 million house for $8.5 million. That's a tough day, right? For most of us. I just had to sell it for $8.5 million. But still, you know, he told the judge, I still don't have enough money to pay the fines for all the legal trouble that I've gotten into. Because why? He didn't count the cost before he went to go ahead and build this house. The question for us that we want to ask is this: is it worth it? Is it worth it? H.L. Hunt, he was one of the very first real millionaires from the late 1800s into the early 1900s. And he said 2 keys to success are this: decide what you really want, and then decide what you're willing to pay for it. And so the question for us is this: is what I'm going to do, is it really worth my time, my money? Is it worth my future? If what I'm about to do, is it worth it? You can go ahead and you can see in your notes there if you're just listening. We'll go through this really quickly. We don't have slides for this, but here are some ways, 4 questions to calculate the cost. The first question is this, the experience question. Based on my past, is this a wise decision? Based on my past, is this a wise decision for me? The second question we can ask about calculating the cost is the timing question. Based on my present circumstances, is it a wise decision right now? It's a timing thing. Maybe if it was in a different season of life or a different timing for it, but maybe the timing. Is this a good time for me to make this decision? The third question is the dream question. Based on my future hopes and dreams, if I make this decision right now, is it going to cut out from me, under me, my legs and cost me my future if I make this decision? And then my favorite one, the fourth way to calculate the cost, is the punt question. You punt to somebody else. Ask somebody else, based on their experience, is this a wise decision? And just get some input, just like we talked about, getting advice. When we find that, it takes us to our 5th step. You can see there in your notes. The 5th step for us is this: prepare for problems. Do we have problems? Yeah, we do. That's why there's chocolate cake and insurance. Why? Because there's problems. And sometimes for some people, just to handle their problems, they have to go ahead and indulge sometimes. In Proverbs 22, verse 3, we find this. Solomon says, a prudent man, again, a wise person, foresees the difficulties ahead and prepares for them. The simple person goes blindly on and suffers the consequences and thinks, somebody can bail me out and somebody can help me get through this. You have family members or friends who kind of do this. They make a decision and then they think, well, my family member, which is you or me, they'll bail me out, right? They'll kind of pick up the slack. And we get flustered and frustrated sometimes. But he says there, prepare. I want you to go ahead and circle that word for us. One of the challenges so many times for us is this. There's a scriptural principle of waiting on the Lord. And sometimes what happens is this, we get preparation or preparing confused with waiting. Just because God says over and over, wait on me, wait on me, wait on me, trust me, wait on me. There's a big difference though, because I think for some of us, we confuse waiting for preparing. Waiting is this sense of very passive, just kind of, hey, I'm waiting for my ship to come in. Hey, I'm just waiting for my big chance. Hey, I'm waiting for things to change for me. I'm waiting for things to get back on track. And yet here's the reality. For some of you that are listening today, some in here, some of you watching online, when COVID and all these things are behind us and we tell some stories, here's the reality for you, is you've been waiting to get back to normal, but you've not been preparing to get back to normal. And in this process, if you're not careful, you're going to get caught up and you're going to get tripped up and frustrated because you have expectations that are not going to be met because life has changed. Life is not going to go back to normal. There is a new normal. As much as you and I hate to hear that term, new normal, we hear it so much, an unprecedented and new normal. We need to go ahead and erase those from our vocabulary. But for us, to understand, we need to be preparing, not just waiting around passively, but preparing for what's to come. The question for us to ask is this. There's two actually for this one. The first one is this. What could go wrong? And what will happen if it does? We've got to be careful here. We talked about this a little bit last week. We've got to gauge our emotions a little bit. We can't go around and worry. And that there's a demon behind every bush, and that bad things are going to happen, and so we got to, there's rain clouds, and it's Murphy's Law, and I heard of a guy who put a bumper sticker on his car one time and said, Murphy's an optimist. That's how bad this guy's life was. And so we have to ask ourselves, what could go wrong? And if it does go wrong, well, how will I respond? How will I work through it? How will I get through it? We have to know the difference in preparing for those problems and solving those problems. And realizing that it's okay to say, when we're not prepared for something, when we're struggling to make a decision and somebody pressures us, if you're not prepared to make that decision, it's okay to say, hey, can you give me some time? Can I get back to you? And not feel the pressure to go ahead and to make a snap decision right in the moment. Number 6 then. The 6th step for us to take is this, as we wrap up. The fear is going to be the big selling point for us when it comes to making decisions, whether we do it or not. And so step 6 is this, to face our fears. The ability for us to move forward and make a decision is going to be to face our fears. To be able to get unstuck and to say, okay, I'm not going to live in the past, but I'm going to move forward with God's help. I'm going to have to face some things that are going to stretch me. They're going to be a little bit uncomfortable. Fear is at the root of all decision making. And fear creates indecision. It causes us to wonder, oh, I don't know, what should I do? Skittles or M&Ms? You ever had that happen? You went and grabbed a handful of Skittles and it turned out to be M&Ms. What a surprise, right? Or maybe you're making something and you put in too much of some ingredient because, well, salt and flour and baking soda and baking powder, it all kind of looks the same, right? But if you put too much of one thing or the other in, it'll mess everything up. And so we find ourselves indecision. Ecclesiastes 11 verse 4. If you wait for perfect conditions, you'll never get anything done. If we wait until everything is just right, the challenge for us is this: we overthink everything. What if? And the opportunity to break free from overthinking isn't to stop thinking. I just need to not think about it. I just need to stop thinking about it and just distract myself. Distraction's not the answer to overthinking. Action. You say, well, how do I know? What should I do? What if I make the wrong decision? Go back to step 1 and work our way through each one of those steps. Pray for guidance. Pray for guidance from God. Get the facts. Ask for advice. And go through those steps. Perfectionism paralyzes the potential. Any potential that we ever want to have, if we're waiting for perfect conditions, it's going to paralyze us. God has always used imperfect people in imperfect situations to get his will done. Think about it. Noah, had he ever built a boat before? Nope. Had Gideon ever led an army? No. Had Esther ever gone before a king before? Was she ever in a position of geopolitical royalty? No. So many people, as you look at their stories throughout the Bible, so many people were not prepared necessarily. They were not professionals, if you will. And yet God used imperfect people in imperfect situations to get his will done. Faith, then, is the antidote to fear. How do we face our fear? To trust God. That even if things don't work out as I hope or plan, that I trust God that it's going to be his will that's going to be done. I'm going to trust God to care for me. And so much of the last year or so, there's been so much fear. There's been so much massive fear that has settled into our hearts. And my prayer for us is that we pivot on these moments and pivot on these opportunities of fear to move forward. Faith is the antidote to fear. How so? Romans 8:31. Great verse. Verse you can take with you this week, memorize even. And I'd encourage you to memorize this. Real simple verse. If God is for us, who can be against us? It's this question with this great answer. If God is for us, then who can be against us? And what's the answer? Who can be against us? Nobody. Why? Because our God is bigger than all of the problems or challenges we might face. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is this: what fear am I refusing to face? What fear am I refusing to face? And whatever that fear is, your ability to move forward is going to be on the other side of that obstacle. And so you say, am I hindering or helping God's plan to be lived out in my life? The way to get over that obstacle, that hindrance, to turn that obstacle into an opportunity, to turn that adversity into an advantage, is to find out and identify whatever that fear is and say, God helping me, I want to take a step of faith to trust God. We've got some great advice for us from that great theologian by the name of Dr. Seuss. As we come down the home stretch this morning, I want to hear from Dr. Seuss and what he says about this issue of decisions and being indecisive. He wrote this little poem for us called The Zode in the Road. Listen in. Did I ever tell you about the young Zode who came to two signs at the fork in the road? One said to place 1 and the other place 2. So the Zode had to make up his mind what to do. Well, the Zode scratched his head and his chin and his pants. And he said to himself, well, I'll be taking a chance. If I go to place 1, now that place may be too hot. And so how do I know if I'll like it or not? On the other hand, though, I'll be sort of a fool if I go to place 2 and find it too cool. In that case, I may catch a chill and turn blue. So maybe place 1 is the best, not place 2. But then again, what if place 1 is too high? I may catch a terrible earache and die. So place 2 may be best. But on the other hand, though, what might happen to me if place 2 is, well, it's too low? I might get some very strange pain in my toe. So place 1 may be the best. And then he started to go. Then he stopped and he said, on the other hand, though. On the other hand, well, on the other hand, though. And for 36 hours and a half, that poor Zode made starts and made stops. Where? At the fork in the road. Saying, don't take a chance. No, you may not be right. Then he got an idea that was wonderfully bright. Play safe, cried the Zode. I'll play safe. I'm no dunce. I'll simply start out for both places at once. And that's how the Zode, who would not take a chance, got no place at all with a split in his pants. You ever feel like that? You're kind of stuck. You find yourself trying to go 2 places at once. And James says this, that a double-minded person is unstable. Why? Because indecision, it's just the fruit of the root of fear in our lives and causes us what? Have split pants sometimes. Do something great with your life for Jesus Christ. Don't just simply exist. Don't just simply wake up in the morning and hit your alarm clock, go through your day, come home, binge watch some television, go through social media, go to bed, just to repeat it over and over again. Make a decision that determines your destiny and makes your life matter for eternity. There are 4 basic life decisions. We've talked about this for Greater Philly Church. My prayer for you as your pastor, as your coach, as your spiritual coach, as your friend is this: that you make these 4 decisions, that you don't have to go ahead and wrestle through even those 6 steps, because we see throughout the scriptures that these 4 basic life decisions, God says, this is my plan and purpose, my dream for you. And so the first decision is this: a decision to belong. Commit to Christ and to a church family. Commit to Jesus Christ and a church family. And maybe for some of you, even those of you who are watching online and at home, maybe for you the decision is, you know what? I want to be more intentional and more purpose to engage at Greater Philly. Maybe it's coming out to church. Maybe it's to be more intentional online, commenting in the comments section, to take opportunities to put myself out there just a little bit and show that I'm a part of something bigger than myself. There is stability when we come together and worship God with one another, as we take our worries and set them aside and replace them with worship. The second decision is this. The second basic life decision is decision to grow and get beyond where I am. Commit to the habits necessary for spiritual growth. Prayer, Bible study, giving back to God, and spending time in a small group with other believers. Our small group for us, for me personally, has been a massive help getting through these last 15 months or so, getting through COVID, as we've taken time. We took some time off when things were really heated and really difficult because of COVID. We weren't sure how things were, but then we decided to go ahead and we started meeting together and playing it safe and spending time together, encouraging each other. The third decision is this: a decision to serve. Commit to using my God-given gifts and abilities in serving God and others. We have soaked up and we have sat and we've had this last year to kind of play it safe and take it easy. And maybe for you, you say, I've got some pains and some difficulties and some grief that I'm going through because of missed opportunities and unmet expectations. And the greatest way to leverage our pain and our grief is to use it for God's purpose, for His glory. So we can say, you know what, here's what I learned, and I can't wait till we can start meeting together again, having brunches and having picnics and doing gatherings, so we can say, well, what did you learn going through COVID? What were some lessons you learned? Things like, you know what, change out my mask every couple of days because it starts to smell after a little while, right? And things that God has taught us through this time. And we use those opportunities to serve other people. And then last of all is this: the decision to share. Commit to sharing Christ with other people. We commit to sharing Christ with other people. That is, we share our story. There are people, I'll just say this aside, that this isn't in your notes, we don't have this on PowerPoint, but people are going to give you their knots. You need to look for the knots with people. And those knots are this: I'm not prepared for this. I'm not prepared for this. I'm not prepared for COVID. I'm not prepared to get back out of COVID. I'm not doing well. I'm not prepared. I'm not doing well. I'm not emotionally doing well. I'm not physically doing well. I'm not spiritually doing well. I'm just not doing well. Maybe for some people, I'm not from around here. If you meet people, there's people that are moving. And we've seen friends of ours that have moved even across the country. We've had people that have moved into this area and actually started checking out Greater Philly Church. When you hear somebody say, I'm not from this area, it's a great opportunity to listen up, to listen to that cue. I'm not prepared. I'm not doing well. I'm not from here. I'm not familiar with God. That's one of the most important knots to listen to. Somebody says, I'm just not too close to God right now. I'm not familiar with God. I'm not close with God right now. You listen to those knots. When you hear those knots, that's an opportunity for us to go ahead and say, you know what? Hey, can I extend to you an invitation to Greater Philly Church? We've got some invites that we made up. You can find them at our guest services. We've got a brand new series coming up, kicking off May 30th, and I'll talk about this a little more after the service, after the message. Winning with the hand you're dealt. We all have cards that we've been handed to in life. Those cards are this: that my chemistry, my consciousness, my connections, my circumstances, my choices. And with all those, we find this, that most of us like to talk about life, where we've been or where we're going, but rarely do we talk about what bothers us about our lives. Things like disappointment with ourselves, difficult relationships, discouraging situations, or even choices we regret. And we get it here at Greater Philly. We get that. Dealing with the hard, difficult hand you've been dealt is difficult. It's hard at times. But that's why we're here. We're here to help you figure out what to do with the cards you've been dealt and how to discover and uncover your purpose in your pain without losing your soul or sense of significance along the way. If you've come through this time and you felt any kind of loss, and you're talking to people who felt loss, this is a great opportunity. You say, what if people, how do I know who to hand it to? If somebody's doing great, if somebody attends another church, if somebody says like, hey, I'm doing wonderful, they're probably not going to receive this. They're probably not going to take it well. So my encouragement was this: I'm not doing well, I'm not prepared, I'm not from this area, or I'm not close to God right now. 4 nots to listen to for people. And that's a cue from them saying, hey, I could use some help right now. That's a great opportunity to pass this off. I'm excited because with this series, we're going to hear some testimonies from church members, people that you know who have gone through circumstances with cards they've been dealt, and they're leveraging those difficulties in their lives, and they're having success, spiritual success, and relational success, and opportunities put before them because they're taking difficult cards they've been dealt, and they're making the most of them in their life. The decision for us then, we talked about the integrity decision, and the conscience decision, and the legacy decision. And this week, with the question of this, the maturity question is, what is the wise choice, the wise decision to make? So the maturity decision is this. It's pretty simple. I will make the wise decision. My prayer for you today is this: when you are faced with a tough decision, that you take the guesswork and complexity out by going step by step and saying, I'm going to, with God's help, make a wise decision and not leave it up to chance or a gut feeling, but I'm going to make a wise decision with God's help today. Let's pray. Father, we thank you so much for your goodness to us. And God,